She had prayed for his death every night for 3 months. Every single night, Akiko Matsumoto whispered prayers to her ancestors, begging them to strike down the American guard who watched over their prison camp. She wanted him to suffer. She wanted him to feel pain. She wanted him gone. But on March 17th, 1946, when a bayonet meant for her heart came slicing through the air, Private James Mitchell didn't hesitate. He threw himself between her and the blade, taking the steel meant for her body into his own. 7 inches of cold metal pierced his chest while she stood frozen, watching the man she'd hated bleed out on the frozen ground, protecting her, dying for her. And in that moment, everything she believed about enemies, about honor, about what it meant to be human, shattered like glass. If this story grips you, subscribe, because what happened next changed her life forever. The Alaska wind bit through Akiko's thin uniform like teeth on January 14th, 1946, turning her breath into ice crystals that hung in the air before falling to the snow-covered ground. She was 24 years old, weighed 98 pounds, and had given up hope of ever feeling warm again. The transport truck lurched through the gates of Fort Richardson POW Camp, and she pressed her cracked, bleeding hands against her thighs, trying to stop them from shaking. It wasn't fear that made them shake. It was the cold, always the cold. 15 degrees below zero, and the wool blanket they'd given each prisoner on the ship from Manchuria might as well have been made of paper. Through the truck's canvas flap, she caught her first glimpse of the camp. Barbed wire fences stretched across white emptiness, guard towers rising at each corner like wooden fingers pointing accusingly at the gray sky. Mountains surrounded everything, beautiful and merciless, trapping them in a bowl of ice and stone. She thought of her mother's garden in Hiroshima, the way cherry blossoms had looked against blue sky in April before the war came. That garden was ash now. Everything was ash. The truck stopped with a metallic groan. American voices barked orders in English she refused to understand, though she spoke it better than most of the other prisoners. She'd been a translator for the Imperial Army, fluent in 3 languages, valued for her sharp mind and sharper memory. Now those skills meant nothing. Now she was just another enemy to be processed and forgotten. They lined up in the snow. 32 Japanese prisoners, mostly women with a handful of men kept separate behind another fence. Roll call took 20 minutes. 20 minutes standing at attention while the wind carved pieces off her soul. A woman beside her, Yuki, started crying softly. The sound was small and hopeless, like something dying in the dark. Akiko wanted to tell her to stop, that tears froze on your face and made everything worse, but her jaw was clenched too tight to speak. That's when she saw him for the first time. Private James Mitchell stood near the processing station, leaning against a wooden post with the casual ease of someone who'd never known real hardship. He was young, maybe 22, with red hair that caught the weak winter light and a face full of freckles that made him look like he'd wandered off a farm and accidentally into a war. He was eating a chocolate bar, actually eating chocolate, breaking off squares and chewing slowly while prisoners shivered 10 feet away. The brown wrapper crinkled in his hands, and Akiko felt hatred bloom in her chest, like a dark flower. He eats chocolate while we freeze. He stands warm in his thick coat while we shiver in rags. This is the enemy. This is what we fought against. Men who have everything and feel nothing. The processing took 2 hours. Medical checks, delousing showers, assignment of barracks numbers and work details. The showers were the worst part, not because they were cold, but because they were hot. Scalding hot water poured over her skin for the first time in 8 months, and it hurt so badly she gasped. The American nurses supervising them moved efficiently, speaking in soft voices, offering no judgment. One of them noticed Akiko's frostbitten fingers and wrapped them in clean bandages without being asked. The kindness was more disturbing than cruelty would have been. By evening, Akiko was assigned to the camp laundry and given a bunk in Barracks C. The building was simple, wooden, painted white, with small windows and a coal stove in the center. Actual beds lined the walls, not mats on the floor or piles of straw, but beds with metal frames and thin mattresses and folded wool blankets. She sat on hers slowly, testing it, feeling it give beneath her weight. She hadn't slept on a mattress since leaving Japan 2 years ago. Her body didn't remember what comfort felt like. The other women in the barracks whispered to each other in Japanese, sharing information, trading rumors. The food here was supposed to be good, 3 meals a day. The guards didn't beat prisoners. Work assignments were light. It all sounded like lies, like propaganda designed to make them compliant. Akiko pulled her blanket around her shoulders and stared at the ceiling, listening to unfamiliar sounds drift through the thin walls. American voices calling to each other in English. Truck engines rumbling, the distant hum of generators. Outside, crickets that somehow survived the cold chirped in the darkness. That night, she knelt by her bunk after lights out and whispered her prayers in the darkness. First, she honored her ancestors. Then she apologized for her capture, for her survival when better soldiers had died. She prayed for her family in Hiroshima if they were still alive. And finally, she prayed for the red-haired American who had eaten chocolate while prisoners froze. Honored ancestors, forgive your unworthy descendant. I live while my brother's body lies in Manchurian snow. I breathe while my mother may be dead in Hiroshima's ruins. Strike down the red-haired American who guards us. Let him suffer. Let him know pain. Let him die slowly so he understands what we have endured. Let me be the one to witness his end. Yuki, in the next bunk, listened in silence. When Akiko finished, the older woman spoke quietly. Akiko-chan, does your hatred keep you warm? It's all I have left, Akiko whispered back. And it was true. Without hatred, without the sharp edge of it to hold on to, she would dissolve into nothing. The hatred gave her structure, gave her purpose, made her still a soldier even in defeat. The first week established a rhythm that felt surreal in its ordinariness. Wake at 6:30 to a bell that rang gentle and clear across the compound. Roll call in the freezing yard, 30 minutes standing at attention. Breakfast at 7, watery oatmeal with brown sugar and raisins, scrambled eggs, toast with jam, coffee and milk. More food than Akiko had seen on one plate in 3 years. She ate slowly, mechanically, trying not to think about how her family in Japan might be eating grass soup if they were lucky. Work assignments began at 8. Akiko reported to the camp laundry, a large building that smelled of lye soap and wet wool, where massive washing machines she didn't understand churned American uniforms in endless cycles. Steam rose from the machines, creating a fog that made the room feel like a different world, hot and wet while outside everything was frozen solid. The work wasn't hard. Load uniforms, add soap, start the machine, wait. Fold the clean clothes, repeat. Private Mitchell supervised the laundry detail. He arrived each morning at 8:15, clipboard in hand, walking through the rows of machines with that same casual ease that made Akiko's teeth hurt. He never yelled, never raised his voice. He said please and thank you to prisoners, as if they were colleagues instead of enemies. When the elderly woman working beside Akiko, Tomoko, struggled with a heavy basket of wet uniforms, Mitchell simply picked it up and carried it for her without being asked. Tomoko bowed deeply, tears in her eyes. Mitchell just smiled that crooked farm boy smile and went back to his rounds. This makes him more dangerous, not less, Akiko thought. Kindness is just another weapon. I won't fall for it. But she noticed things despite herself. The way he hummed while he worked, old songs she didn't recognize, the way he showed genuine concern when someone looked sick or tired, the way he shared his lunch break chocolate with Tomoko every single day, breaking off half his bar and leaving it on her workstation when he thought no one was watching. On the 8th day, the bread incident happened. It was breakfast, and the line moved slowly through the mess hall. Each prisoner received their standard ration, 1 slice of bread, 1 cup of oatmeal, 1 piece of fruit. Tomoko was ahead of Akiko in line. The old woman's hands shook as she took her bread, and when she turned away from the counter, she stumbled. The bread fell from her fingers into the dirty snow that prisoners had tracked in on their boots. Ruined, inedible. Tomoko stared down at it, tears forming in her eyes. That bread was survival. That bread might be the difference between making it through the day or collapsing from hunger. Other prisoners looked away. No one had extra to share. The rule was clear. You ate what you were given, nothing more. Mitchell saw it happen. He was supervising the breakfast line, standing near the door with his arms crossed. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, without hesitation, he walked to the serving counter, took his own breakfast ration, 2 slices of bread with jam and butter, his personal portion that guards were allowed, and gave it to Tomoko. He pantomimed that she should take it, his hands gentle, his expression kind. Tomoko looked around in confusion, not understanding. Prisoners weren't given guard rations. This didn't make sense. Mitchell pressed the plate into her hands and walked away. Akiko watched from 10 feet away, rage building in her chest like pressure in a sealed container. More manipulation, more kindness that makes no sense. He gives her his bread, and tomorrow he'll expect something in return. This is how they break us. They give us just enough comfort that we forget who they are. But I won't forget. I won't. After breakfast, Mitchell approached her. He'd noticed she was intelligent, that her eyes were always watching, evaluating, seeing everything. Through the camp translator, a Japanese-American corporal who spoke both languages, he tried to make conversation. "Your friend okay?" the older lady, Mitchell asked. The translator repeated it in Japanese. Akiko stared through Mitchell, as if he were made of glass. "Look, I know you don't trust us," Mitchell continued. "I get it, but nobody here wants to hurt you folks. We're just trying to—" Akiko cut him off, speaking in English for the first time, her voice cold and precise. "You want us grateful? For prison? For taking everything?" Mitchell looked genuinely surprised that she spoke English. "No, I just don't want anyone to go hungry." "Then end the war sooner," Akiko said. "Oh wait, you already won. And still we suffer." Mitchell opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He looked pained, genuinely hurt by her words. Finally, he nodded slowly and walked away without another word. That night, Akiko prayed even more viciously for his death. She wanted him to feel what her family felt. She wanted him to understand loss, hunger, despair. The hatred intensified because the guilt intensified. Every meal she ate was a betrayal of everyone starving in Japan. 2 weeks into her captivity, the letters arrived. Mail call was announced after dinner, and the entire barracks went silent. Letters from home, the translator said, delivered via Red Cross. Not everyone would receive one. Communication was still difficult. Japan was occupied, infrastructure destroyed, mail service barely functional. Akiko received a thin envelope, the paper so fragile it felt like it might dissolve in her hands. Her younger sister's handwriting, shaky and desperate. She sat on her bunk and opened it carefully. The letter was dated December 1945. 2 months to reach her. Akiko Nisan, we received word you are alive and in American custody. Mother wept for 3 days with relief. Then she wept for 3 more with shame. Hiroshima is gone. Not damaged, gone. Where our house stood is black glass and ash. Grandmother died in the flash. We never found her body. Mother's face is scarred from burns. She covers it with cloth when she goes out. Father has not spoken since August. He sits by the river, staring at nothing. I am working in the fish market. Gutting catch for American soldiers. They pay in chocolate and cigarettes. I trade these for rice. This is how we survive. Brother Takeshi's body was never recovered from Manchuria. They say the Chinese scattered the dead in mass graves. Mother says prayers to an empty altar. Do the Americans treat you well? Are you cold? Are you fed? I hate to think of you suffering, but I hate more to think of you comfortable while we starve. I don't know which would hurt less. Your sister, Keiko. Akiko read it once, folded it carefully, placed it in her pocket, went back to work. Only later at night did she let herself cry, silent tears that froze on her cheeks in the darkness. That night, her prayer for Mitchell's death reached a fever pitch. She didn't just want him dead. She wanted him to suffer first. She wanted him to lose everything, like she had lost everything. She wanted him to understand. 3 weeks later, she would get her wish, just not the way she expected. The washing machine broke down on a Tuesday in early February, smoke pouring from its mechanical guts, water leaking across the concrete floor in a spreading pool that reflected the overhead lights. Akiko stared at it helplessly. She knew how to load clothes and push buttons, but the machine's insides were a mystery of belts and drums and metal pieces that made no sense. Mitchell was called to fix it. He arrived 10 minutes later with a toolbox, his red hair already messy, grease on his hands from working on a truck earlier that morning. He assessed the problem quickly. Years of fixing farm equipment making his movements confident and sure. Broken belt, jammed drum. He'd need to crawl inside the machine to reach it, and he'd need someone to hand him tools. He looked at Akiko. Can you help? She wanted to refuse, wanted to walk away and let him struggle. But the other women needed this machine working. They had quotas to meet, so she nodded once, sharp and angry. Mitchell crawled inside the washing machine, his voice echoing from the metal interior. Wrench. The big one. Akiko handed it to him without speaking. Thanks. His muffled voice came back. This thing's a dinosaur, probably older than both of us. Silence from Akiko. He emerged 15 minutes later, covered in grease, his face smudged with oil. You know, you could just say you're welcome. Wouldn't kill you. You don't know what would kill me, Akiko said quietly. Mitchell paused, wiping his hands on a rag. You're right. I don't. He stood up, stretching his back, and then did something unexpected. He showed Akiko how to do basic maintenance on the machine so it wouldn't break again. He was patient, thorough, treating her like a colleague instead of a prisoner. He pointed to different parts, explained their functions, demonstrated how to check the belt tension and clear the drainage pipes. His hands were competent and careful, and Akiko found herself paying attention despite herself. On the farm where she'd grown up outside Hiroshima, men like this had been valued, respected. Men who could fix things, who understood how machines worked, who didn't waste words or motion. But this was the enemy. Competence didn't erase what they'd done. Did it? As Mitchell packed up his tools, another guard walked by. Sergeant Dawson, 40 years old with a bitter mouth and eyes that looked at prisoners like they were insects. Mitchell, you fixing machines for the Japs now? What's next, tucking them in at night? Mitchell's voice went stiff. Just doing my job, Sergeant. Dawson looked at Akiko with open contempt. You better be grateful, girl. Boy here's too soft for his own good. He walked away laughing, his boots heavy on the concrete. After he left, Mitchell turned to Akiko. Sorry about him. Not everyone here is... Don't apologize. Akiko cut him off. I know what your people think of us. He doesn't speak for all of us, Mitchell said. No? Then who does? Mitchell had no answer. He picked up his toolbox and left without another word. 2 days later, Akiko was sorting laundry alone when Mitchell stopped by her station during his rounds. He hesitated, then pulled a Hershey's chocolate bar from his pocket. He set it on the table near her without speaking and started to walk away. "I don't want your charity," Akiko said, not looking up from the clothes she was folding. Mitchell turned back. "It's not charity. It's just chocolate. Nothing is just anything. Everything has a price." "Okay," Mitchell said. "What's the price of a chocolate bar?" "My dignity." He picked up the chocolate, looked at it, looked at her. "You think pretty highly of yourself if you think I'm trying to buy you with a candy bar." Akiko was surprised by his directness. She looked up, met his eyes for the first time in days. "Look," Mitchell continued, "I get it. You hate being here. You hate us. You probably hate me specifically. Fine. But you look hungry, and I've got extra, and my mama raised me to share. That's it. No conspiracy." "Your mama raised you to guard prisoners?" Akiko asked, her voice sharp. Mitchell laughed, the sound unexpected and genuine. "No, she raised me to fix tractors and milk cows. Life had other plans." He set the chocolate down again and walked away, whistling some tune she didn't recognize. Akiko stared at the chocolate bar for a full minute. The brown wrapper caught the light from the windows. She thought about her sister Keiko, gutting fish for American soldiers to trade for rice. She thought about her mother's burned face. She thought about her brother's unmarked grave in Manchuria. And then, when no one was watching, she took the chocolate, unwrapped it slowly. The smell hit her first, sweet and rich, a smell from before the war, from childhood, from a time when the world made sense. She bit into it. The first taste melted on her tongue, and for exactly 3 seconds, she forgot where she was. Pleasure and shame mixed together until she couldn't tell which was stronger. She ate the whole thing. That night, her prayer for Mitchell's death was quieter, less vicious, but still there. The blizzard came in mid-February, a massive storm that turned the world into white chaos. Visibility dropped to 0. Temperatures plummeted to 40 below. The camp essentially shut down, too dangerous for normal operations. At 2 in the morning, the coal stove in the women's barracks ran out of fuel. The temperature inside began to drop fast. 65 degrees at 2 a.m., 45 degrees at 3. By 4, frost was forming on the inside of the windows. Akiko woke to Yuki shaking her shoulder. "The coal. We need more coal or we'll freeze before morning." The coal shed was 200 yards away across the compound. In this storm, it might as well have been 2 miles. Akiko looked around at the other women, most of them older, weaker. She was the youngest, the strongest. She had the best chance. "I'll go," she said. The other women tried to stop her. Too dangerous. The storm would kill her before she made it 10 feet. But Akiko was already pulling on every piece of clothing she owned, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Someone had to try. She stepped outside into hell. The cold wasn't just temperature. It was a physical force, pressing against her lungs, making every breath painful. The wind screamed like a living thing, drowning out everything else. White everywhere. Sky and ground merged into one blank sheet of nothing. She couldn't see the guard barracks, couldn't see anything. She started walking in what she hoped was the right direction, counting steps, trying to stay oriented. At 50 steps, she fell. The wind was too strong. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see. Her hands went numb in seconds. Her face felt like it was being flayed. She tried to stand, fell again. This was how she would die, she realized. Frozen in the snow 20 yards from help, trying to save people who would freeze anyway. Then hands grabbed her, strong hands, lifting her off the ground. She looked up through ice-crusted eyelashes and saw red hair matted with snow. Mitchell had been on night watch. He'd seen her leave the barracks, followed her into the storm without hesitation. He picked her up, her body too weak to resist, and carried her through waist-deep snow to the guard station. Inside, he wrapped her in blankets and made her drink hot coffee that burned her throat. Her fingers were white with frostbite. He rubbed them carefully, trying to restore circulation, his face grim with concentration. "Stay here," he said, and then he went back out into the storm himself. Akiko watched through frosted windows, consciousness fading and returning in waves. She saw Mitchell load coal into a cart, saw him push it through the blizzard, falling twice, getting back up each time, saw him reach the women's barracks and carry the coal inside, then saw him fight his way back to the guard station, ice in his hair, his face red and raw from the cold. When he came back inside, shaking from hypothermia himself, Akiko managed to speak. "Why?" Mitchell looked at her, genuinely confused. "Why what? Why save me? Why get the coal? We're nothing to you." "You're not nothing," Mitchell said quietly, warming his hands by the stove. "You're human beings. We're enemies. The war's over." "Not for me," Akiko whispered. Mitchell looked at her for a long moment. "Then you're fighting alone." Akiko lay in the blankets, watching him warm himself by the fire, seeing his hands tremble from cold, realizing he'd risked his life, not because he had to, but because that's who he was. This is worse than cruelty, she thought. Cruelty I can fight. Cruelty makes sense. But this This genuine care for people who hate him? I don't have weapons against this. 3 days later, Yuki collapsed during work. Appendicitis. She needed immediate surgery, or she would die within hours. The camp doctor was away at the base hospital, 50 miles through mountain roads still blocked by snow. He wouldn't return for 8 hours. Yuki had maybe 4. Mitchell found a field medic manual in the guard station. He'd used it before on the farm, helping with animal emergencies and basic human first aid. He thought he could do the surgery, but it meant risking a court-martial if it went wrong, and he needed help. Someone who spoke Japanese to keep Yuki calm. He asked Akiko. She stood in the doorway of the makeshift operating room, staring at the basic surgical kit laid out on a metal table, at Yuki's pale face, at Mitchell's steady hands preparing instruments. Help the enemy perform surgery, betray everything she'd been taught, or let Yuki die. I'll help, she said. The surgery took 90 minutes. Mitchell's hands shook at first, then steadied. Akiko held Yuki's hand, translating her screams into words of comfort, handing Mitchell instruments when he asked. The room smelled of antiseptic and blood and fear sweat. Halfway through, Mitchell's scalpel cut too deep. Blood welled up faster than expected. Shit, Mitchell muttered. Shit, shit, shit. What happened? Akiko demanded. I cut. There's too much blood. I can't see. Then fix it. Akiko's voice was sharp. I'm trying. I'm not a surgeon. Then become one, Akiko said. She dies, and it's on both of us. Her words snapped him back. He breathed, focused, worked methodically through the problem, clamped the bleeding vessel, sutured carefully, removed the appendix, closed the incision. When it was over, they sat in silence, both covered in blood. Yuki was unconscious, but breathing steadily. Mitchell's hands were still shaking. I almost killed her. But you didn't, Akiko said quietly. If that doctor comes back and says I did this wrong, you saved her life. Mitchell looked at her, really looked at her. We saved her life. It was the first time they'd worked together towards something. Not prisoner and guard. 2 people trying to keep someone alive. That night, for the first time in 3 months, Akiko didn't pray for his death. After the surgery, something fundamental shifted between them. Mitchell stopped pretending everything was normal. Akiko stopped pretending she didn't speak English fluently. They found themselves in conversations during work breaks, short exchanges that revealed more than either intended. He told her about Iowa, about cornfields that stretched to the horizon, about his mother who could deliver a calf at 2 a.m. and still make breakfast for 6 people by dawn. She told him about Hiroshima before the bomb, about cherry blossoms in April, and the way her grandmother's hands had looked while folding origami cranes. They didn't talk about the war. They talked around it, like 2 people walking carefully around a hole in the ground, both knowing it was there, both pretending they could ignore it. Mitchell started teaching her American idioms during laundry shifts. It's raining cats and dogs made her laugh despite herself, the image so absurd she couldn't maintain her anger. She tried to teach him Japanese in return. He was terrible at it, his Iowa accent mangling every syllable. But he tried. She found herself correcting him patiently, then realizing she was smiling. She caught herself and stopped, but the damage was done. The wall between them had cracks. One afternoon in early March, Mitchell showed her a photograph of his family. His mother stood in an apron, tired but smiling. His father looked weathered and stern, a farmer's hands rough from decades of work. 3 younger siblings clustered around them, teenagers with gap-toothed grins. That's home, Mitchell said quietly. Farm outside Des Moines, 200 acres of corn and soybeans. Akiko studied the photograph, her finger tracing the edge. Your mother's hands, they look like work. She can do anything, Mitchell said, and there was pride in his voice. Sew, cook, birth livestock, strongest woman I know. You miss her. Every day. He looked at her. You miss your family? Akiko was quiet for a long moment. I miss who they were before the war. She almost told him about Keiko's letter then, almost shared the pain of knowing her family was starving while she gained weight in captivity. But she remembered he was still the enemy and closed off, the wall rebuilding itself brick by brick. But Mitchell had seen the vulnerability. The mask had slipped just for a second, and he'd seen the grief underneath. The warnings started in whispers. Yuki, recovered from her surgery, pulled Akiko aside one evening after dinner. Some of the men are planning something. They're talking about honor, about dying as soldiers rather than living as prisoners. Escape? Akiko asked. We're in Alaska. Where would they go? It's not about escape. It's about refusing to accept this. Yuki gestured around the barracks, at the warm stove and the clean beds. Some of them see this comfort as a cage. They want to fight, even if fighting means dying. Colonel Takeshi approached Akiko directly the next day during exercise yard time. He was a former Imperial Army officer, mid-40s, with eyes that burned with something that looked like madness, or faith, or both. We are samurai, Akiko-san, he said in formal Japanese. We do not beg for scraps from our enemies. We do not smile at them like dogs hoping for treats. We fight, or we die with dignity. I'm offering you freedom. Part of Akiko responded to his words. The part that remembered her training, that felt shame at being captured, that hated depending on American kindness. But another part, a growing part, questioned what honor was worth if you were dead. I'll think about it, she told Takeshi. She didn't commit, but she didn't refuse. The day before the attack, March 16th, the air felt heavy with tension. Everyone could sense something coming. Mitchell found Akiko in the laundry room early that morning. He was quieter than usual, his eyes troubled. "You okay?" he asked. "You seem tense." "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." He sat on a laundry cart, dropping the professional distance he usually maintained. "Something's off in the camp. Command is nervous. Extra patrols. If something's going to happen, I need you to stay safe." "Why do you care?" The question came out sharper than she intended. Mitchell looked at her with those earnest green eyes. "Because you're a person, and I'm not going to let anything happen to you if I can help it. You might not have a choice. Then I'll make a choice anyway." She should have warned him then. 5 words could prevent bloodshed. 5 words could save his life. There's going to be an attack tomorrow during exercise yard time, but speaking them would make her a traitor to everything she'd been raised to be. She stayed silent. That evening, she saw him one last time before it happened. They ended up near each other during the exercise yard walk. She called his name. He turned. "If something were to happen," she said carefully, "if you had to choose between following orders and doing what's right, what would you choose?" Mitchell thought about it. Right thing, every time. Orders don't mean much if you can't sleep at night, even if it cost you everything, especially then. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Be careful tomorrow." "Always am." "No, I mean really careful." She held his gaze. "Just be ready." She walked away before he could ask more questions. It was the best she could do, the most warning she could give without becoming something she wasn't ready to become. March 17th, 1946, 10:47 in the morning. The exercise yard was cold but clear, snow crunching underfoot as 30 prisoners walked in circles. 20 men, 10 women, 4 guards stationed at the corners. Mitchell was at the north position, rifle slung over his shoulder, hands in his pockets against the cold. Akiko stood with Yuki near the east fence, 40 feet from Mitchell's position. Her heart was pounding. She knew it was about to happen, but didn't know exactly when or how. She watched Colonel Takeshi walking with the other men, saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. At 10:48, Takeshi dropped a handkerchief. The signal. Everything exploded at once. 4 male prisoners rushed the guards simultaneously. Takeshi's main force, 6 men, charged the South Tower, where Sergeant Dawson was stationed. A diversion group created chaos in the center of the yard, shouting, throwing rocks, anything to create confusion. The women were supposed to scatter to add to the panic, but Akiko just stood frozen, watching it unfold like a nightmare in slow motion. Sergeant Dawson fired warning shots. The prisoners didn't stop. Hand-to-hand combat erupted near the South Tower. Mitchell ran toward the chaos from his position, his hand reaching for his sidearm, but not drawing it yet. He'd been trained not to shoot prisoners unless absolutely necessary. Then Akiko saw him, one of Takeshi's men, breaking away from the main group, running straight at Mitchell. In his hand was a bayonet, 7 inches of steel that caught the pale sunlight. A weapon that should have been locked in the armory, but had somehow been stolen weeks ago, hidden, saved, for this moment. The man was 15 feet away from Mitchell, 10 feet. Mitchell still hadn't drawn his weapon, was still trying to process what was happening, was still operating on the assumption that these were prisoners who could be subdued without lethal force. 5 feet. Time fractured into individual heartbeats. Akiko saw it all with terrible clarity. The bayonet aimed at Mitchell's chest. The trajectory clear and certain. The distance closing. Mitchell's hand finally moving toward his holster, but too slow, too late, always too late. And she was running, not thinking, not choosing. Just moving. Her body made the decision before her mind caught up. She was 20 feet away, sprinting across frozen ground, her mouth opening to scream. "Mitchell, behind you!" Her voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Mitchell spun, saw the attacker, reached for his pistol, but the man was already lunging, the bayonet driving forward with all his weight behind it. Mitchell's eyes found Akiko, saw her running toward the danger, toward him, her face twisted with something that looked like terror. In that fraction of a second, he made his choice. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't try to dodge. He stepped forward, putting himself between Akiko and the attacker, his body a shield she never asked for. The bayonet punched into his chest just below the left collarbone, with a sound Akiko would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. A wet, terrible sound of metal entering flesh. Mitchell gasped, his whole body jerking from the impact. Blood bloomed instantly across his uniform, spreading like spilled ink, dark and impossible. The world became sound and sensation and horror. Gunfire in the distance. Someone screaming. the attacker being tackled by another guard, shot, falling. But Akiko only saw Mitchell. He fell backward, and she caught him, or tried to. They went down together in the snow, her hands immediately going to his chest, pressing against the wound, blood hot and slick between her fingers. So much blood. Too much blood. No, no, no! The words came out of her in a continuous stream, panic and denial and grief all mixed together. Mitchell, stay with me. He looked up at her, his face already going pale, shock setting in. You're okay? Why did you... She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't process what he'd done. You stupid! Why didn't you shoot him? Mitchell coughed, and blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. You were in the way. Couldn't risk hitting you. I'm the prisoner! She was shouting now, crying, her hands soaked with his blood. I don't matter! His hand found hers, the grip weak but deliberate. Yes, you do. The words broke something inside her. Every prayer she'd whispered for his death, every moment of hatred she'd cultivated and nurtured and held on to like a weapon, all of it shattered in the face of this simple truth. He believed she mattered. Even now, dying because of a choice he'd made in a split second, he believed it. Medics arrived, shouting orders, pulling her away. She fought them. I'm not leaving him. Miss, you need to step back, one of them said. Let her come. Mitchell's voice was barely a whisper. That's an order. They let her ride in the ambulance. The 15-minute drive to the base hospital stretched into eternity. The siren wailed above them. The medic worked frantically, starting an IV, applying pressure to the wound, barking vitals to his partner. Mitchell's breathing was labored, wet-sounding, wrong. The bayonet had punctured his lung. Every breath was a struggle. Akiko held his hand and whispered in Japanese, the words coming without thought. Don't you dare die. Don't you dare leave me with this guilt. Mitchell's eyes fluttered open. What are you saying? She switched to English. I'm saying you're an idiot, and I need you to survive so I can tell you that properly. His lips curved in the faintest smile. Deal. Then he passed out, and the medic's face went grim, and Akiko realized she might lose him before she ever had the chance to understand what he'd given her. The waiting room at the base hospital smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. Akiko sat in a plastic chair, still covered in Mitchell's blood, her hands shaking no matter how hard she tried to stop them. She wasn't supposed to be there. Prisoners didn't wait in hospital waiting rooms. But Mitchell's last conscious order had been for her to stay, and the medics were too busy to argue, and no one had the heart to remove her. 8 hours passed. Other guards came and went. Some stared at her. Some ignored her. Corporal Jenkins sat across from her for a long time before finally speaking. You warned him. I heard you scream. Why? Akiko didn't answer, didn't know how to answer, because the truth was too complicated, too tangled, too new. Private Stone brought her coffee she couldn't drink. Mitchell's a good kid, he said quietly. Best of us, really. Always said prisoners were people first. Guess he meant it. Sergeant Dawson, the racist sergeant who'd mocked Mitchell for being kind, stood in the doorway at one point. He looked at Akiko for a long moment, his face unreadable. I was wrong about you, he said finally. And I was wrong about him. He's got more guts than the rest of us combined. Then he walked away. At 7:30 that evening, the surgeon emerged, his scrub splattered with blood. Everyone in the waiting room stood. Akiko's heart stopped. He's alive, the surgeon said, and the collective exhale was audible. Bayonet missed the heart by half an inch, punctured the left lung, shattered a rib, damaged some muscle tissue, but he'll make it. He's young, strong, barring infection, full recovery in 6 months. Can I see him? Akiko's voice was small. The surgeon looked at her, took in the blood covering her clothes, the tears streaking her face, the desperate hope in her eyes. 5 minutes. He needs rest. Mitchell's hospital room was small and sterile, full of beeping monitors and the hiss of oxygen. He lay in the bed, pale as the sheets, tubes, and wires everywhere, chest heavily bandaged, but breathing, alive. Akiko sat in the chair beside his bed and let herself cry properly for the first time since childhood. Told you. Mitchell's voice was weak, but there was humor in it. I'd be careful. You're the worst liar I've ever met, she said through tears. Learned from the best. She laughed and cried at the same time. Why did you do it? Do what? You know what. You could have shot him. You could have let him... She couldn't finish. No, I couldn't. Why? Mitchell's eyes were serious, despite the pain. Because you matter. Simple as that. Akiko took a shaking breath. I prayed for your death, every night for 3 months. I wanted you to suffer. I know, Mitchell interrupted gently. She stared at him. You knew? Figured. Can't say I blamed you. How can you not hate me? Same reason you warned me, Mitchell said. Same reason you're here now. War's over, Akiko. We get to choose who we are after. The words settled into her like seeds finding soil. He was right. The war was over. She'd been clinging to hatred because it was all she had left, because without it she was nothing, just a survivor with no purpose. But maybe purpose didn't have to be destruction. Maybe it could be something else. I choose to be someone who doesn't let good people die, she said quietly, even if they're idiots. Mitchell smiled. I'll take it. The camp investigation concluded that Akiko had tried to prevent the attack by warning Mitchell. Other prisoners testified on her behalf. She was cleared of conspiracy, but the social cost was high. Some women avoided her now, seeing her as a collaborator. Others supported her quietly, grateful she'd saved a good man. The barracks split down invisible lines. One woman spit at her feet and called her a traitor in Japanese. Akiko looked her in the eye and said, "Honor means nothing to the dead." Mitchell was transferred to the base hospital for recovery. Akiko was given permission to visit twice a week, an unprecedented arrangement that raised eyebrows throughout the command structure. But Mitchell had nearly died protecting a prisoner, and somehow that earned him the right to decide who visited him. Their conversations during those visits changed everything. They talked about real things now, their fears, their families, their hopes for a future neither could quite imagine. She brought him books from the camp library. He tried to learn Japanese from her patient teaching. She read him poetry in her native language, her voice soft and melodic, and he closed his eyes and listened like it was music. "What does it mean?" he asked after one poem about cherry blossoms. "That beautiful things are temporary, and that's what makes them precious." "Is that what we are?" Mitchell asked quietly. "Temporary?" "Everything is temporary," Akiko said. "War, prison, even enemies." In late April, the announcement came. Repatriation would begin in June. Prisoners would be sent back to Japan. Ships were being prepared. The war was truly over, and it was time to go home. Akiko should have felt joy. Instead, she felt dread. She told Mitchell during one of her visits. They were sitting in the hospital courtyard garden, Mitchell in a wheelchair, spring sun weak but warm on their faces. "They're sending us back. 2 months." "That's good," Mitchell said, but his voice was hollow. "You'll see your family." "Will I? The sister who wrote me has lived through things I can't imagine. How do I talk to someone who's survived hell while I ate 3 meals a day? The same way I talk to you, one word at a time. It won't be the same. Japan, it's destroyed, occupied. Nothing like I remember. Then you'll build something new." "With what? We have nothing left." Mitchell reached out and took her hand. It was the first time they'd touched since the day he nearly died. "You have yourself. That's something." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "My address, farm in Iowa. If things don't work out or if you need anything, write me." Akiko took the envelope like it was something precious and fragile. "You think they'll let letters through? Japanese civilian to American soldier? War's over. Everything's different now. Maybe letters can get through too." "I'll write," she promised. "Maybe not soon. I need to see what Japan is first, who my family is now, who I am, but I'll write. I'll wait. Don't wait. Live. That's what you taught me. Then we'll both live, and maybe our lives will cross again." On June 15th, Akiko stood on the same dock where she'd arrived 6 months earlier. The fog hung thick over San Francisco Bay, turning the world gray and cold, just like it had been in January. But everything was different now. Mitchell was there, standing with other guards, still recovering but insistent on being present. Their eyes met across 50 feet of dock, too far to speak, too public for more. Mitchell touched his chest, where the scar was, nodded once. Akiko touched her heart, nodded back. "You saved me. You saved me too." As the ship pulled away and the Golden Gate Bridge disappeared into fog, Akiko stood at the rail with Mitchell's address in her pocket and her sister's letter beside it. Past and future, side by side. 6 months ago, she'd prayed for his death. Today, she prayed for his life, and for hers, and for the possibility that temporary things could somehow become permanent. She arrived in Tokyo, to devastation beyond comprehension, and a family she barely recognized. Her mother's scarred face, her father's silence, Keiko's hard pragmatism. They looked at her health and saw betrayal. She looked at their suffering and felt guilt that would never fully heal. But she worked, rebuilt, survived, and 3 months after returning, she wrote the first letter. It took Mitchell 2 months to reply. When his letter arrived, she read it 5 times. They wrote monthly at first, then weekly. For 6 years, letters crossed the Pacific, 2 people building something from words and hope and the memory of a moment when everything changed. In August 1952, Mitchell came to Japan on an agricultural exchange program. They met at Tokyo Station. 6 years of letters, 6 years of becoming different people. They stood 3 feet apart, 2 survivors who'd saved each other in ways neither fully understood. "Hi," Mitchell said. "Hi," Akiko replied. "You look different." 6 years will do that. I was going to say beautiful, she smiled. You were always terrible at lying. He reached for her hand. She took it. They married in 1953, had 3 children, built a life on his family farm in Iowa where Akiko worked as a translator and cultural liaison. When people asked about the scar on his chest, James always said, "That's the mark of the moment I learned what truly matters." Akiko kept every letter he ever wrote her, all 247 of them, one for each woman who'd stepped off that ship in 1945, expecting demons and finding humans instead, because sometimes the enemy is the one who saves your life. Sometimes hatred transforms into something else. And sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet, but the simple act of standing between someone and death, even when they prayed for yours. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that notification bell. History is full of these moments, the small choices that change everything, the unexpected connections that remind us we're all human. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that enemies can become family, that hatred can transform into love, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone save you. Leave a comment. What would you choose? Honor or humanity? Past or future? The story continues in the comments.